I didn't think a company dinner could make you feel homeless in a room you were invited to. But that's exactly what it felt like when my coworker looked right at me, smiled like we were friends, and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Hey, can you find another table? This one's kind of booked." There were clients sitting with us. Our director was 2 seats down. People actually laughed, the polite kind, like it was a harmless joke and not a grown adult trying to erase me in public. I forced a small smile and stood there for half a second too long, holding my phone like I'd just walked into the wrong wedding. And then 2 hours later, I was staring at a receipt for $3,500 with my name on it, while everyone else was already in Ubers, posting selfies and texting, "Great night, team." I'll tell you up front, I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I didn't even argue with him in the moment. I did something worse. I stayed calm. I kept every scrap of proof, and I let the system do the damage. This happened about 3 months into my job. Mid-sized tech company, the kind that calls itself a family in all-hands meetings while quietly tracking your badge swipes. I was on the analytics side, junior role, good performance reviews so far, still learning who had actual power and who just had the loudest voice. My coworker, Brandon, was the loudest voice. He wasn't my boss, not even close. Same level as me on paper, but he'd been there longer. He was charismatic, and he had that "I golf with the right people" confidence. He'd walk into meetings late, crack a joke, and somehow the agenda would bend around him like gravity. The weird thing was, he'd been nice to me at first. Overly nice, like he wanted to be the first person I bonded with. Then I got assigned to help with a project he'd been pushing for, something he clearly wanted to own solo. I didn't even ask for it. Our manager forwarded an email and wrote, "Looping in OP for additional support." From that day, Brandon's kindness got selective. Little things. He'd forget to add me to calendar invites, then act surprised when I didn't show up. He'd message me 5 minutes before a deadline like, "Hey, did you ever finish that thing?" with the tone of someone documenting your failure. In meetings, he'd rephrase my points like he'd invented them, then glance at me like daring me to correct him. I started keeping my head down, doing the work, sending follow-ups in writing, the boring stuff that keeps you employed. Then our director announced we were hosting 2 clients who were in town. Big enough accounts that everyone suddenly cared about the relationship. The plan was a nice dinner, team plus clients, plus leadership. Expense covered, obviously. It was framed as a reward and a chance to build rapport. I remember thinking, finally, a normal corporate moment. Eat overpriced food, laugh at mediocre jokes, go home. We met at this steakhouse downtown, the kind with dim lighting, heavy menus, and waiters who say "excellent choice," no matter what you order. When I walked in, Brandon was already there in a blazer that screamed, "I want you to think I'm important." He clapped me on the shoulder. "There he is, ready to impress?" I laughed because that's what you do when you don't want trouble. The table was in a private alcove. Our director, Melissa, was there with 2 clients and their account rep, 2 other coworkers from sales, and Brandon, sitting like he was hosting. There was an empty chair near the middle, and I moved toward it, without thinking. That's when Brandon leaned back in his seat, scanned me up and down like I was a delivery guy, and said, "Oh, hey, can you find another table? This one's kind of booked." He said it with a grin, like we were doing a bit. At first I thought he meant there was an extra person coming. Then I realized there were only 8 place settings. 8 people, 8 chairs, and I was the 9th. Melissa looked confused. One of the clients did that awkward blink people do when workplace dynamics leak into public. I felt my face get hot. Not rage, something worse. That embarrassed, trapped feeling where you know you're being tested and everyone's watching which version of you shows up. I glanced at Melissa, expecting her to step in. She didn't. Not because she agreed with him. I don't think she even processed it. She was mid-conversation, and corporate leadership has this reflex where they pretend they didn't hear something uncomfortable if it might slow the vibe down. Brandon kept smiling. So I did what I've learned survival sometimes looks like. I smiled back, smaller. All good, I said, like it didn't matter. I pulled another chair from a nearby table and sat at the very end, half outside the alcove, like a backup musician, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored. Conversation rolled on. Drinks came. Apps hit the table. Brandon made sure the clients laughed. He kept ordering things for everyone, without asking. Oysters, Wagyu sliders, a bottle of something expensive I didn't recognize. And every time the waiter hovered, Brandon would glance at me briefly, just long enough to make sure I was still aware I didn't belong. I kept my posture steady, asked the clients a couple safe questions, took mental notes. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Brandon rely on your reaction more than your status. I didn't know it yet, but my silence was exactly what he needed for the next part. Because around dessert, he leaned toward the waiter and said something I couldn't fully hear. Then he looked at me again and smiled like he'd just sealed an envelope. And a few minutes later, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. One of those payment app pings you don't get often unless something's wrong. I glanced down at the screen. It was a receipt request. My name, my number, and a total that made my stomach drop. $3,487.62 before tip. I stared at it, trying to make it make sense, while everyone else podnielsa laughed and started doing the goodnight rounds like nothing happened. Brandon stood, patted my shoulder again, and said, "Thanks for being flexible tonight, man. Really appreciate it." Then he walked out with the rest of them, leaving me in a dim alcove with a waiter holding a check presenter like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The waiter didn't rush me. That almost made it worse. He stood there with that professional half-smile, the kind that says this happens more often than you think, and gently placed the leather folder on the edge of the table like he was setting down something fragile. "Whenever you're ready," he said. I opened it even though I already knew the number. Seeing it printed made it heavier. Itemized lines ran down the page like a confession. Premium cuts, shared plates, multiple bottles of wine I hadn't touched. My credit card details were already attached at the bottom, pulled from the payment request Brandon had sent earlier. That's when it clicked. This wasn't sloppy. This wasn't an accident. He hadn't just stuck me at the end of the table. He'd set me up as the payer from the start. I took a slow breath and asked the waiter quietly, "Can you tell me how this was assigned to my card?" The waiter hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Your colleague asked us to split checks earlier. He said you were handling the group tab. He showed us the payment confirmation." I nodded. No scene, no raised voice, just a calm thank you and another look at the receipt. Because here's the thing. Company dinners at my job do get expensed, but only if the charges follow policy. There are caps. There are categories. There are approval chains. And most importantly, there's documentation. And documentation cuts both ways. I paid the bill. I didn't argue. I didn't call Brandon. I didn't text anyone asking what the hell just happened. I signed, tipped appropriately, and left the restaurant like nothing was wrong. Outside, the night air felt sharp. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Brandon. "Hey man, really appreciate you tonight. Finance will sort it out." That thumbs up emoji did something to me. Not anger, clarity. I got home and didn't sleep much, not because I was spiraling, but because I was replaying the night, frame by frame, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Times, words, who sat where, who ordered what, who said what to whom. By morning, I had a timeline. I forwarded the receipt to myself, downloaded the merchant invoice, took screenshots of the payment request, Brandon's message, and the calendar invite for the dinner, the one that listed him as the organizer. Then I opened our expense policy. The policy was boring, dense, corporate, exactly the kind of thing people like Brandon never read because they assume charisma counts as compliance. There it was in black and white. Group meals must be expensed by the organizer or a designated approver. Alcohol above a certain threshold requires director-level approval. Reimbursement requests must reflect who incurred the expense, not who fronted it, for convenience. That last line mattered, because Brandon hadn't just embarrassed me, he'd misrepresented the transaction. At 9:12 a.m., I submitted the expense report, not under Brandon's name, under mine, with a detailed note explaining that I had been asked to cover the group tab after being told to sit separately, and that I was requesting reimbursement per policy. I attached everything. At 9:47 a.m., Finance replied asking for clarification. At 10:03 a.m., I replied with screenshots. At 10:21 a.m., my manager, Melissa, pinged me. "Can you step into a room?" She didn't sound angry or defensive. She sounded confused. In the conference room, she closed the door and asked one question. "Why did you pay for that dinner?" I told her the truth, calmly. No editorializing, no insults, just facts. Her expression changed halfway through, not dramatic, but subtle. The way someone looks when they realize a story they laughed off the night before has edges. She asked me to forward everything to her. I did. Then she said something that stuck with me. "I need to loop in finance and HR. This shouldn't have happened." That afternoon, Brandon stopped by my desk, like nothing was wrong. "Hey," he said casually. "Crazy bill, right? But it'll get reimbursed. No stress." I looked up at him and nodded. "Yeah, I documented everything." He paused, just a beat too long. "Documented," he repeated, smiling. "Company policy," I said. "You know how it is." He laughed, but his eyes didn't. "Right, paper trails." When he walked away, I noticed something new. He didn't go back to his desk. He went straight into a meeting room with finance. That was just the beginning, because once the questions started, they didn't stop with the bill. They asked why the organizer didn't expense it himself. They asked why alcohol was ordered beyond limits. They asked why a junior analyst was listed as the payer for a client-facing dinner. He didn't organize. And by the end of the day, the conversation wasn't about reimbursement anymore. It was about intent. That night, my reimbursement status still read pending. But for the first time since the dinner, I wasn't worried, because I realized something important. Brandon's power only worked in rooms where nothing was written down, and now everything was. The waiting is the part nobody warns you about. Once something like this leaves your hands and enters process, your life doesn't explode. It slows down. Emails take longer to come back. Conversations get quieter. People start unchoosing words like they're stepping on glass. By the second day, everyone knew something was off. Not the details, just the shift in air. Brandon wasn't loud anymore. He showed up early, stayed glued to his laptop, stopped wandering the floor. No jokes, no shoulder pats. When he did speak in meetings, it was careful, almost rehearsed, like someone who suddenly realized the room was recording. Finance emailed me again, asking for one more thing: confirmation that I hadn't volunteered to cover the dinner. That request mattered, because in corporate disputes, the difference between asked and offered is the difference between misconduct and misunderstanding. I replied with the exact phrasing Brandon had used that night. Quoted, time-stamped, no commentary. 2 minutes later, they acknowledged receipt. That afternoon, HR reached out, not accusatory, neutral, polite, a calendar invite titled Quick Synced. I didn't rush to defend myself. I didn't rehearse speeches in my head. I walked in with the same mindset I'd had all week. Clarity beats emotion. The HR rep asked me to walk through the dinner chronologically. I did. When she asked how being told to find another table made me feel, I paused. "Uncomfortable," I said, but I didn't think it was actionable until the bill. She nodded and wrote something down. Then she asked something that surprised me. "Has anything like this happened before?" I hadn't planned to say yes, but the truth was already organized in my head. I told her about the missing invites, the last-minute messages, the pattern of credit taking. I didn't frame it as harassment. I framed it as behavior. She listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, she thanked me and said, "We'll be speaking with others." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me anymore. That evening, Brandon finally texted me again. Hey, HR is asking questions. Just want to make sure we're aligned. It was obviously a misunderstanding. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, I've been aligned with policy the whole time. No emoji, no softener. 10 minutes passed, then, did I do something wrong? That question was almost impressive. Perfectly phrased, open-ended. A trap. I didn't take it. I've shared my account accurately, I wrote. I'll let finance and HR handle it. After that, silence. The next morning, my director asked me to sit in on a broader meeting. Finance, HR, legal, and management. Brandon wasn't there. That absence was loud. They went over the expense line by line. Who ordered? Who approved? Who benefited? Legal asked one question that cut straight through everything. Why was OP listed as the payer if he was not the organizer and was excluded from the primary table? No one answered right away, because there wasn't a good answer. By lunchtime, my reimbursement was approved in full. By end of day, it cleared my account. But the relief didn't land the way I expected. Instead of feeling vindicated, I felt steady, like something inside me had finally snapped into place. That night, I replayed the dinner again, not with embarrassment this time, but with distance. And I saw it clearly. Brandon hadn't just tried to humiliate me. He'd tried to use me. Social pressure, junior status, public setting. He assumed I'd either swallow it or complain emotionally. Either way, he'd come out clean. What he didn't plan for was patience. The next week, the team dynamic cracked. People started double-checking expense emails, CCing more carefully, asking clarifying questions in meetings. Brandon's casual authority evaporated. Not overnight, but visibly. He stopped being the guy who handled things. He became the guy people documented. Then HR scheduled a final meeting. This one was short. They didn't share details. They didn't need to. They told me my account was substantiated, that no retaliation would be tolerated, and that my reporting had been appropriate and professional. As I stood to leave, the HR rep added, "For what it's worth, you handled this well." I nodded, thanked her, and walked out. On my way back to my desk, I passed Brandon in the hallway. He looked tired, smaller somehow, not defeated, just stripped of the ease he used to wear. We made eye contact. For a moment, I thought he might say something. He didn't. He just stepped aside and let me pass. That was the moment I understood something important. I hadn't won yet, but the version of me who would have absorbed that humiliation quietly, the one Brandon counted on, was gone. And whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be polite. Everything accelerated after that. Not in a dramatic movie scene way, but in the quiet, procedural way that ruins people who rely on vibes instead of facts. The following Monday, Brandon was pulled into a meeting first thing in the morning. Not a quick sync. A closed-door, calendar-blocking, cameras-on meeting with finance, HR, and legal. His manager canceled 2 client calls to attend. That alone told me this had crossed an internal threshold. By noon, rumors started circulating. Not exaggerated ones, just fragments. Someone overheard finance asking about prior expense reports. Someone else mentioned legal requesting archived emails for pattern review. A sales rep whispered that a client had flagged something about billing transparency. That last one mattered, because the dinner wasn't an isolated incident. Once finance started pulling reports, they didn't just see my receipt. They saw history. Dinners Brandon had organized where junior teammates fronted costs. Alcohol-heavy tabs coded creatively. Reimbursements pushed through quickly because no one wanted to challenge him in front of clients. What looked like confidence from the outside started to look like risk from the inside. By Tuesday, Brandon wasn't leading meetings anymore. He attended muted, camera off. He stopped messaging people casually. Every Slack message he sent sounded like it had been proofread by a lawyer. Then came the email, not sent to the whole team, but visible enough to be noticed. Brandon was temporarily reassigned pending review. His projects were redistributed. One of them landed on my plate. No one said anything out loud, but the message was clear. Whatever shield he'd been operating under was gone. That afternoon, Melissa asked me to talk. She didn't apologize. She didn't defend herself. She just said, "I should have intervened at the dinner. I didn't. That's on me." I respected that more than an excuse. She also told me something I hadn't known. When finance questioned Brandon about the bill, his first explanation was that I had offered to cover it, as a gesture to the clients. That claim fell apart instantly. The seating issue, the payment request, the texts, the policy language. Too many points of friction for one story to survive. When pressed, he changed his explanation. That was mistake number 2. By Thursday, HR concluded the behavior met the internal definition of misuse of authority, even without a formal reporting line. Legal flagged exposure with client billing optics. Finance recommended corrective action. None of that was emotional. None of it was personal. It was arithmetic. On Friday morning, Brandon was called in again. This time, he packed up his desk afterward. No announcement, no farewell email. Just a quiet removal. The kind companies prefer because it keeps everything clean and deniable. He walked past my desk, carrying a box with a few notebooks, a framed certificate, and the blazer he liked to wear to meetings. He didn't look at me. An hour later, my manager called me in and told me I'd be transferring teams. Effective immediately, not as damage control, as a move better aligned with my work and communication style. Translation: I was being moved somewhere safer. My reputation didn't take a hit. If anything, it solidified. The dinner came up once more, weeks later, when finance updated policy training. No names, just a scenario. Everyone knew. What surprised me wasn't Brandon's exit. It was how quickly the office recalibrated without him. The jokes got quieter, meetings ran tighter. People stopped assuming confidence meant correctness. Processes mattered again. As for the money, it stayed refunded. Clean. Final. No clawbacks. No strings. The chaos passed, and what remained was something better than revenge. It was order. Brandon didn't lose everything because I exposed him. He lost it because he built a system that only worked when no one checked the numbers. I just made sure they did. By the time his name stopped coming up, I realized something else had changed. I didn't flinch anymore. Not in meetings, not in rooms with power dynamics, not when someone tried to test where I fit. Because once you survive being publicly dismissed and quietly proven right, you stop needing validation. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. The quiet afterward was the strangest part. Not relief, not triumph, just quiet. A week after Brandon left, I realized no one had mentioned his name once. Not in meetings, not in side chats, not even in the casual way offices usually process sudden exits. It was as if the company had folded him out of the story cleanly, like a paragraph that no longer fit. My transfer settled in quickly. New team, clearer roles, fewer performances. People spoke plainly. When someone disagreed, they said it directly instead of wrapping it in jokes or status. The work felt heavier, but honest. One afternoon, my new manager asked me to walk him through a report. Halfway through, he stopped me and said, "I appreciate how precise you are. It makes my job easier." That sentence landed harder than any apology ever could have. The reimbursement had long since cleared. The money stopped mattering. What stayed with me was the moment at the table, the way I'd felt small for a few seconds, like I didn't belong there. That feeling didn't disappear overnight, but it changed shape. It became a reference point. I noticed it the next time someone tried to talk over me in a meeting. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push. I waited, then repeated my point calmly, and the room adjusted. Not because I demanded it, because I didn't flinch. Power, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just consistency paired with patience. A month later, Melissa checked in, not formally, just a message. "Hope you're settling in. For what it's worth, I'm glad you spoke up." I thanked her, and meant it. I never heard from Brandon again. No late-night texts. No LinkedIn views. No attempt to rewrite the story. I heard through someone else that he'd landed somewhere smaller, somewhere less forgiving with expenses. Whether he learned anything from it wasn't my concern. What mattered was this. He didn't get taken down by a dramatic confrontation or a public call-out. He got taken down by his own assumptions. He assumed junior meant disposable. He assumed silence meant compliance. He assumed confidence could replace structure, and he assumed wrong. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't even plan justice. I just refused to absorb something that wasn't mine to carry. That night, at the dinner, when he told me to find another table, he thought he was placing me beneath him. What he actually did was give me space to step out of his shadow. Now, when I think back to that receipt, the number, the shock, the moment my stomach dropped, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude, because it forced a decision I might have postponed for years. Do I stay quiet to keep the peace, or do I trust myself enough to let the truth stand on its own? I chose the second option, and nothing dramatic happened. The right people noticed. The wrong behavior collapsed, and my life got quieter in the best possible way. No loose ends, no unanswered questions. Just a clean ledger. That's the thing about karma in real life. It doesn't roar, it reconciles.